Join us every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the SKNIS Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.
I'm Ian Richards. Welcome to InFocus, a weekly program where we zoom in on what's happening within and throughout the government, your government. Cancer is among the leading causes of death in St. Kitts and Nevis, and health authorities have initiated several measures to better diagnose and treat cases of such as part of the commitment to quality health care. Now, a recent donation of two pieces of equipment, which would be a colonoscopes and also two gastroscopes to the Joseph and Franz General Hospital, will significantly enhance service in this area. Joining us today to discuss the impact of the donation on patient care, as well as the upcoming Caribbean Society of Endoscopic Surgeons 12th Annual Scientific Conference, is Dr. Joel Woodley Faisal, Chief of Surgery at the Joseph and Franz General Hospital, and Dr. Mark Grant, Consultant General Surgeon. Stay with us as we delve into your government, your business.
So my camera is this.
Welcome back to InFocus, and allow me to introduce and welcome to our program for the very first time Dr. Joel Woodley Faisal and Dr. Mark Grant. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So, Dr. Woodley, as you mentioned, it's okay to call you that, and we're old friends, so I can call you that. Yes. Let's start with your open the interview with questioning you in terms of the role of a chief of surgery. What exactly does that mean?
Okay, so good afternoon, and to those persons who are viewing, pleasant good afternoon, or whatever time you may be viewing this at. As the chief surgeon, you're actually supervising the surgical ward. As we know, and there's a misconception because persons, when they hear about surgery, they just think about general surgery. But under that umbrella, we have so many other doctors who do surgical procedures. So we have, for example, we have the orthopedic surgeons. They are surgeons as well, but as you know, they would deal with the bones, the muscles, the tendons, etc. We have gynae-obs, the gynecologist, the obstetrician. They are also surgeons too, because they do surgical procedures. We have ear, nose, and throat. We have, as the name implies, ear, nose, and throat. We have vascular surgery, though that's the doctor who deals with, the vessels, the blood vessels, the lymphatic vessels, basically the pipes in the body. We have the urologist, who's also a surgeon, and he deals basically with the male parts and the kidney, the urinary tract system. And we would have, dentistry is also, they have surgical procedures, but they're not under our umbrella at the institution. So what the chief surgeon does basically is more or less to coordinate all the surgical doctors and practices, in that area, in that department, making sure that, the list for surgery and the type of surgeries that are being done by each doctor, that doctor should be doing it. So I shouldn't have somebody who is a general surgeon probably doing, a cesarean section. Unless we don't have any gynecologist, obstetrician on island, and we are in a dire, need, and then the general surgeon actually, has to jump in. So as the general surgeon, we basically coordinate everything that happens on the surgical ward. We also, not just the surgical practices in the OR, but there's also the surgical ward itself, Okay, so where patients are interned there for however long, the general surgeon, the chief surgeon, makes sure that we have beds available, make sure that, you know, all of the patients are being attended to properly. Sometimes there may be a problem in another unit, for example, in the orthopedic unit, and they may come to the chief of surgeon to see how we can best, you know, get that problem solved. So it's basically more or less the chief surgeon is to coordinate what takes place on the surgical unit, which includes the surgical ward and also the operating room as well. We also make sure that we liaison with the nurses too, because as we know, the nurses are a very integral part of our existence as surgeons. So we have to make sure that the nurses, they too understand their role they play on the surgical unit as well. So more or less, the chief surgeon overlooks. As a general surgeon, as they're saying, in the next few years, we probably will become obsolete because you have so much subspecialties of surgery that you may no longer need a general surgeon because you would have somebody who deals just with the neck, somebody who just deals with the chest, somebody who just deals with the abdomen. As a general surgeon, we tend to span all of that sometimes from head right down to toenail. But as the subspecialties come into play, that is where they're saying probably we may become obsolete. But I don't think so in these neck of the woods, in these third world countries, developing island states, where we don't have the budget to have so many subspecialties. Then I think as a general surgeon, I still have a role to play.
Right. Okay, and you've been in that role how long?
I've been in that role probably about a year and some months. I've been in that role.
Mm-hmm. How have you found that, having that post and the responsibilities that come along with it?
First of all, I would have to say I would be the first female, basically, you know, adopting that role. So because our culture is a bit, you know, insensitive to females in head positions, sometimes it can be a bit challenging. But for most parts, my focus is quality patient care. So whenever I have to intervene to help give quality care, I always intervene. Whether there may be a little pushback. And when you're dealing with people, and you know, everybody knows, once you're dealing with people, it's never an easy road. You're going to always have differences because we're human beings. And we do accept differences, we understand differences. But our main objective at the end of the day is to get to that point where the patient gets the best. So it has been challenging here and there, which, you know, I expected it to be, but it's nothing that I can't handle.
Okay, let's bring Dr. Mark Grant into the surgery now. Dr. Grant, talk to us a bit about what your responsibilities are at JNF, and as mentioned earlier, it's a consultant general surgeon.
Yes. So I'm a general consultant, I'm a consultant general surgeon who is here on a capacity building exercise, in that there are many services that are not available at JNF. And I'm assisting in bringing some of those to JNF. So by way of introduction, I'm actually a general surgeon with subspecialty training in trauma and critical care, surgical critical care. And my areas of focus are minimally invasive surgery, which includes laparoscopic surgery and robotic surgery. I also have a major fascination with teaching laparoscopic surgery. And so that's a part of my capacity building here in SKNIS.
And how long have you served as consultant general surgeon at JNF?
At JNF, I've been here since January.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that your responsibility is to try to upgrade the surgical offerings, the surgical services that take place at JNF. So what are some of the areas that you have been working on?
So one area of focus is laparoscopic surgery. Keyhole surgery is what some people call it. As some people call it laser surgery, which it's a big difference between the two, but it's bringing keyhole surgery. There are many people from the country who may go overseas because they realize that that has been the standard for over 20 years. Many persons having to travel overseas, that's an additional cost. They are away from their social support services. And therefore being able to bring those services right at people's doorsteps is quite important to me. So laparoscopic surgery is one of those areas. Equipment, which we'll get to, is a big factor. No longer do we have the ability as doctors to just show up and work with our hands and our pens, because to get some of the outcomes that we're hoping to have, we have to have an investment in equipment.
Dr. Fasal, can you talk to us a bit about the relationship now and how you and Dr. Grant, how do you interact with each other? How do you develop that working relationship to ensure that everything is in synergy?
So you see, I smiled so when you asked that question, because the synergy has been great so far. And I really have to, let Dr. Grant know, which I have said to him before. I'm so grateful that he's on island. As he said, he's here, to build capacity, and effectively, that's what he's doing. Not only to myself, he has extended himself to all of us at the hospital as it relates to surgery. I can also say that Dr. Nariani, who is one of those persons too, who would have latched on to Dr. Grant and is so grateful for the work that he's also doing with him. Now, the relationship, why it is one that is unique and I think also iconic and historic, because we are allowing our people to come back in and give back. We are not putting any obstacles, we're not putting any boundaries. Persons who want to come back, especially our own, from the diaspora, we are welcoming that. And Dr. Grant, and he probably is being modest and didn't want to say, he has been trained for years and he has been giving back for years. But I think this last year and a half, has been the most freely that he has been able to come back home and been able to spread his wings per se and give back fully to the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. So the relationship has been great so far. I'm learning everything I can from him. I'm always, texting him. And it feels good to have someone where you can bounce ideas off. Nobody should be practicing in silos. Nobody should be practicing in cells, especially medicine. Because, medicine, we are dealing with people. The more eyes you have in on a case, the better. The more ideas you have in, it's always to the patient's benefit. So Dr. Grant has given me that little, sigh of relief that I was looking for many years. That person who I can have immediately next to me, who I can ask a question, and vice versa. We sit down, we speak about cases, we collaborate on cases. We came from different schools, we bring both ideas together. But at the end of the day, it's for the patient's benefit. And going forward, he not even just stays on the surgical unit. I mean, by now, everybody at the hospital knows Dr. Grant because he goes to the different wards, he gives his input, which is, greatly appreciated. And sometimes we're in our own little corner and we don't know what is happening on the outside. So having persons in to let us know what's going on the outside, it's so important. And that is one of the reasons to why we are bringing the conference here, to bring exposure. Okay, so this is Dr. Grant being here has started the ball in terms of, bringing exposure of GNF to some of the surgical practices, the cutting edge things that are happening outside there. So him being here has helped tremendously. The patients of the Federation, they took and attest to it because laparoscopy, we have done quite a bit.
Right. And we're going to talk a bit more about that, but the title then, Consultant General Surgeon, that has more or less rolled back some of the bureaucracy and given him an opportunity to operate more freely to offer his services.
Yes, it has. It definitely has. And many persons have benefited so far. We don't have a figure right now, but we're going to get it later on the amount of keyhole surgeries we have done. So we were able to get people back to their workforce in a quicker rate. We were able to decrease the large incisions that persons are so accustomed to on their abdomen, which we call the centipede incisions. We have improved the service of such that we can actually just look and realize, okay, I probably don't even need to do anything, and just give that person nothing more than a finger breadth of an incision, put a camera in and look around. And that's not just all. In terms of structure, in terms of getting protocols for our unit, Dr. Grant is very instrumental in that as well, along with the medical chief of staff, Dr. Wilkin as well, and the other surgeons who are on the service as well.
So Dr. Grant, let's talk a bit about now how do you balance your responsibilities here in St. Kitts and Nevis and overseas, because of course you practice overseas. Tell us a bit about what you do overseas and how you balance that here with what you serve in St. Kitts and Nevis.
So in my practice in the United States, I am a general surgeon with trauma and critical care with the same focus that I do have here. Obviously, I do more robotic surgery there. which is not available in St. Kitts and may not be available for some time to come. It's easy for me to balance my role here because I've taken a full time away from my practice there to be here. And so my balance is quite easy because I have a full immersion in what's going on right now.
How long is that commitment? Have you decided as yet?
I wouldn't discuss it in this forum.
Okay. All right. So then what I will ask then is that, given that you're here now, how do you use your connections and your networking with persons in the United States, whether they are part of the diaspora or persons who you would have interacted with overseas, to help to benefit the services that you're offering here, and including to boost the equipment and the other services available at JNF and locally?
So I'm just a small cog in this big wheel, and there are many persons in the diaspora who have been doing this much longer than I've been doing. So if I were to mention Dr. Spencer Amory from Columbia University has been coming to St. Kitts over 20 years, extending endoscopic services on the island. And there are many other persons who have attempted to do that. And if we were to segue directly to the equipment, the purchase of the equipment and at the hospital lower the barriers to many persons from the diaspora being able to make their contribution. One of the problems is that if you're coming in, you need equipment and you have to bring that equipment to yourself, then that creates a barrier. By having equipment that is government owned, it means that many persons in the diaspora can just come in, the equipment is here and they can offer their services. So I represent just a very small cog in that very big wheel, which is the diaspora of St. Kitts Nevis. We also have the situation in which it's very easy for me to pick up or make a call for somebody in the diaspora or one of my clinical partners. I'm here as a team, and not just a clinical team, but this happens to be the person of my wife, who is a pediatrician, and she leverages that connection quite a bit. She's able to call many of her subspecialty partners and provide management support for many of the patients that we encounter. So we're able to utilize that connection to the diaspora as much as possible. But as I mentioned, it's not just the diaspora. In the conference that is upcoming, we are now also looking at regional partners, such as members of the Caribbean College of Surgeons, the Caribbean Society of Endoscopic Surgeons, and we're able to leverage our connections with them in order to enable good care to our patients here.
Why is it so important for you to give back?
I think the motto of St. Kitts is country above self. I think a lot of times we throw that motto on its head and it's more self above country. I remember being in Central America teaching laparoscopic surgery, and I came to a conference in St. Kitts, the Caribbean College of Surgeons, and that's where I met Dr. Woodley, who had this passion of bringing laparoscopy to St. Kitts. And her passion for it made me think, if I can do this in remote Central America, why can't I do it in St. Kitts that has more resources? It's a place that I was born, and it's a place that I want to give back to. I'm just building upon the support that persons like my mother, who served as a nurse for 40 years in this country, would have done. So it's very easy for me to want to give back, and I'm happy for the opportunity to be able to do so.
Right. And Dr. Woodley, if we can talk a bit before we take a break in terms of what it takes to get a surgery done, in the sense of there's a team that works together. As you mentioned, your role as the chief of surgery is to bring everybody together. How many persons essentially are involved in getting a successful surgery done?
Well, first of all, it just depends on the surgery. But generally, we would have, surgery entails the pre, which is before, the actual surgery, and the after. Many times persons just think about surgery as the surgical procedure, the actual day of surgery. But the actual day of surgery is preceded by so many things before that some persons don't recognize that's part of it. So sometimes when we get them to the office and we say to them, you have to do all these tests before they are surprised because they think that they come to me on Monday and by Thursday they would be in the operating room. It doesn't work like that. So we have to do our pre-assessment of the person. And that pre-assessment normally includes doing, labs, blood works, sometimes chest x-ray, it just depends, ultrasounds, sometimes CT scan. When we have all of that, then that person has to be seen by an anesthesiologist. And I'm happy that you asked that question because then again, it seems as if it was the culture. I see you today, Wednesday, and you are in the operating room the following day, or I see you on Friday and you're there on Saturday. There are cases where if it's an emergency, then we have to do that. But when we are in the presence of what we call an elective case, where we have time to plan, it's not an emergency, you're not dying, then we have to do all the tests, as I said before, and you would have to see the anesthesiologist. That is the lady or the male, the doctor, who would actually put you to sleep, as we would call it in the layman's term. So that doctor then has to assess you and basically clear you, as it were, for you to go and do surgery. Now comes the day of the surgery, the surgical procedure. So the person now would actually come to the operating room. They would be met by the nursing staff. And even before they're met by the nursing staff that day, the day before the surgery, the nurses actually go to the ward. They look for the patients who will be doing surgery the following day, and they too would do their clinical assessment of the case. And we have different tiers so that we don't miss anything. That is why I said to people at JNF, we're not practicing. This is not magic. We're not doing a magic show up there. Mm-hmm. We are following best practices and protocols. So the nurses, they do their pre-assessment the day before as well. And sometimes they too would see something that is off and they would give us a call. Doc, I'm realizing the pressure. Doc, I'm realizing this. Doc, I'm realizing that. Because sometimes patients are so afraid, and even though they would have gone to the different tiers of doctors, would miss something, and then it's picked up by the nurse. So the nurses themselves, they would do their pre-assessment the day before. So on the day of the surgery, they would see them again, and they would be looked at again, make sure that all of our T's and are crossed, all of our I's are dotted. And then the actual surgery day, we go in and we will do surgery. There again, we have nurses. We have nurses who will be preparing the instruments. We have nurses who will do the washing, as we would say, of the instruments. We have a nurse, a circulating nurse, making sure that everything is coordinated in the operating room. Of course, confidentiality is of utmost importance in our practice. Once the patient gets in fact, once we come in contact with the patient, confidentiality is, at the top of the list. So while we are doing surgery, well, I have Dr. Grant now with me, so most times we are both doing surgeries, and we do our procedure, and then the surgery is over. The person is taken down to the recovery room, where they have to recover, they wake back up from anesthesia, and then from there they go on the ward. Now, before you go, I see you looking at your clock. The post-operative care is important because surgery is not just surgery. The surgical intervention itself, and the post-operative care. And that is where the patient compliance is important for the surgery to be successful. So as Dr. Grant knows, we can have a successful surgery. We can do it well. Incision looks great, but if the patient doesn't comply after, then that surgery can actually get complicated.
And that would be something like make sure you take your medication.
Make sure you take your medication.
Make sure you don't do anything strenuous.
Right. Continue. You have your follow-up visits. You understand? You do all the instructions that the doctor would have said to you when you are leaving that place. I have persons who did surgery, hernia, and I would say to them, do not go to your field to go and, dig up, as we would say, potato. And a week after they're out there doing that, they would irritate the wound and then things happen. So the post-operative care is important. But what I want to get through is that surgery is not just the cutting process. It's a before, it's the cutting process, and there's an after.
Right. Okay. Very important. And of course, with following doctor's orders, and as you mentioned, going out in the field, there's also the risk of infection. That's also very important. And there are 2 surgical procedures now that will be offered a lot more at the Joseph and Franz General Hospital, and that will be thanks to a donation by the Social Security Board. We're up against the clock. We're going to take our first break, and then we're going to come back up talk about that donation and the equipment that was donated and how it will impact patient care here in St. Kitts and Nevis. We'll be right back for more In Focus. Welcome back to In Focus. We're having a discussion with Dr. Joylette Woodley Faisal, who is the Chief of Surgery here in St. Kitts and Nevis at the Joseph and France General Hospital, and Dr. Mark Grant, who is a consultant general surgeon. Okay, so persons who are looking at us online or on live on ZIZ television would have seen some pieces of equipment that were donated by the Social Security Board. It took place, I believe it was earlier this week, or was it last week?
Last week.
Last week, right, where it's Wednesday as this is being taped. So it was basically a colonoscope and a gastroscope. Tell us a bit about those pieces of equipment.
Okay, so first of all, I would love to thank Social Security for coming on board. And as the director said, which is Christopher Lord, Social Security, they love to give back in the form of, health services, contributing to the health system and also to the education system, which, both of them go hand in hand because we have to educate as healthcare providers. So I really want to thank them for coming on board for that. What I also want to say, they helping us to purchase that equipment actually has allowed the hospital for the first time to own its own gastroscopes and colonoscopes. As Dr. Grant would have alluded, this now allows persons from the diaspora to come in and have the ability to use these scopes freely, as opposed to what was happening in the past where these scopes were owned privately. So that is a really big achievement for the institution, the executive management at JNF Hospital, the Minister of Health, the Honorable Dr. Terence Drew, that the institution has now been able to own its own colonoscope and gastroscope. So that was the big deal last week about the equipment that you would have seen on your screen. So we were able to purchase through the persistence too of Dr. Grant, who just kept on those, the suppliers over in China, day in, day out, making sure that these things were shipped and shipped on time, especially for our conference. So we have two colonoscopes, which are two tube-like instruments that we would normally use to assess the colon, where the scope would be passed through the anus and go right around to your cecum. And then we have two gastroscopes.
The cecum is?
The cecum is that's a part of the colon as well.
Okay.
That's just after the small intestine. And then we have two gastroscopes, which we actually would use to look down in the stomach, go into the mouth. You can actually evaluate the mouth as well with it, the back of the throat, the esophagus, which is your food pipe, and the stomach, which is where, most of your food is stored after you would have eaten for at least 2 hours or so. So these two scopes are important, and I'm going to let Dr. Grant jump in a while, because they would help us to diagnose a lot of illnesses, especially those that are malignant. And then it would also help us to do early detection. And as we know, when we detect early, we are actually saving lives. So I'm going to let Dr. Grant come in as well, because he was very instrumental in acquiring these instruments. And we, once again, I just want to say thank you to Social Security, Mr. Lord and his team for giving us this opportunity to get these instruments.
Right, and Dr. Grant, as you jump in, perhaps you can also explain malignant for those who are not aware of what the term means.
Right. So before I explain malignant, kudos must go to Social Security for their willingness to get on board. But I don't think we would be here without the efforts of Dr. Spencer Amory and his team from Columbia University, who for 20 years have been providing endoscopy support in St. Kitts. As we came in and recognized that the equipment that they did have was on its last leg, it was important to not just go and get another set of equipment that's not owned by us, but to have equipment that's owned by the government. And again, this lowers the barriers for other persons in the diaspora, because there are many persons in the diaspora who are gastroenterologists who do different forms of endoscopy who would be able to utilize this equipment. So when we talk about malignancy now, we can have growths in different parts of the body. If I would try and make it as simple as possible, we have a growth that's not that's benign, in that it will grow, it may bother you, but it is not going to be a cancer. Some of those growths need to be removed because some of them are disfiguring, some of them cause discomfort. A malignant growth, on the other hand, is something in which the growth is going to be out of control, is not going to stay in that one location, but it will spread to other parts of the body. With malignancies, it is best to pick them up at the very earliest phase, because the treatment options available at the very early phase is very, very different from the treatment option that's available later down. And so if I were to look at something like colonoscopies, we would prefer for persons to have colonoscopies at the earliest opportunity, to be able to pick up that growth before it becomes a cancer. Because if it becomes before it is a cancer, we can just remove it via the colonoscope or the gastroscope and prevent it from becoming a problem throughout the rest of the body. On the other hand, if it is allowed to progress to the point that it becomes malignant, we are now dealing with a major surgical procedure, and the outcome sometimes is far different. So we would want to get persons to have these procedures as early as possible. We talk about screening. We want for somebody who's at the age of 45 to say, I need to have a colonoscopy because I'm at that age. That's a current guideline. It shouldn't be because you had a change in your bowel movement. It shouldn't be because you have some form of infection there. It should be because you get to the age of 45, you recognize that if I go and have this colon screening at this age, then that might protect me for the next 10 years. We also want to make sure that the local payers, the insurance companies, abandon the old habit of saying you probably have to have a gripe or something wrong with you to have a colonoscopy. A colonoscopy or gastroscopy, depending on what you're looking for, is something that you should use liberally for screening. The other aspect of it is, if you have a family member who had a cancer of any form, your risk of developing a cancer is much higher. So it is important for us to look for it early rather than picking it up much later. And things like a colonoscope and a gastroscope enable us to be able to pick up these things as early as possible.
It sounds like it's a game changer for services offered at JNF.
Well, as Dr. Grant said, these services were actually being rendered before, and we really have to underscore the work of Dr. Spencer Amery. In fact, the scope that I was using before Social Security graciously, donated those to us was the scope that he left. And, with his big heart, he realized that we needed to be doing these things on a more frequent basis. And he left his scopes for me. He said to me, use them. He's not charging for them. Of course, we have to maintain them. So there are certain parts we would have to buy which cost money, and we would have to put our hands in our pocket and, buy those parts that are needed. But the basic instruments that we have, that we are using there, that we don't have to plead and beg anybody for, they were left by Dr. Spencer Amery. Because as you know, he comes probably every 6 months, but in between there, he said we should be able to carry on this program without interruption, without having to plead or beg anyone who has any private instruments, and anybody can come home and use them. What I also want to underscore, we have a young lady who's doing gastroenterology, which is the study of the intestines, the stomach. She's back off into Cuba studying that. In the next 3 to 4 years, she's going to be back. So now that doctor does not have to beg and plead a private owner to use his or her instruments. Why? Social Security has donated these instruments to us. So when that doctor comes back, and I am sure she does not even know the work we are doing for her. When she comes back, she has a platform already there for her, just waiting. All she has to do right now is to study well, gain all her expertise, and when she comes back home, the instruments are there. So this is a big deal. This is a big thing for the hospital. So as Dr. Grant said, kudos to Social Security for donating those instruments.
I think I must add to that is what's different this time is having, one may go, well, why do you need two pieces of equipment? Why do you have a double of both? Quality is a big factor in providing endoscopy services. And in providing endoscopy services, you have to be able to ensure that you can clean that equipment. The care and maintenance of the equipment in between cases is quite important. So having two pieces of equipment allows us the time to clean the equipment properly, because we want to minimize the risk of cross-contamination to patient, infection to patients, and we want to make sure that we're following international best standards in allowing for the proper time for care and cleaning of the equipment in between cases. So having the duplicate in terms of two of each is important. It is only a start, and I would like to assure those persons with the deep pockets that we will have to purchase more equipment. This is only the beginning, but it provides us the basics of what is necessary and to be able to beginning to offer quality care when it comes to endoscopy, not just at JNF, but throughout the St. Kitts Nevis.
A point that you made, Dr. Grant, that I have to touch on is you spoke about persons getting screened at the age of 45, getting their colon screened. Colon cancer, most persons may not be aware that it is, I think it was ranked third in terms of leading causes of death in St. Kitts and Nevis. Of course, persons are familiar with breast cancer. This is October. Of course, we know about that. Prostate cancer is also something that is prevalent, but not many persons speak about having colon cancer. But that services, based on the way the disease is having the impact on persons, is very important here in St. Kitts and Nevis.
Right. So colon cancer, I'm almost certain that if we were to dig deep, we'll find that it is higher than its current status as number 3. I think that there isn't a month that I've been here that I haven't been able to pick up a new colon cancer. And we're talking about not just from the cecum, but we're also dealing with rectal cancers as well. This is something that we can do a lot better with, and screening is a major factor. We also want persons who, when they identify a change in bowel movement, change in bowel habits, to recognize that probably I should check and see what's going on. It's not always a hemorrhoid that's bleeding. It's good to verify that it isn't something else. It isn't simply because you're not drinking enough water that you're constipated. It's very good to try and figure if it is something else. If you have a family history of colon cancer, it is better for you to be able to identify that you don't have colon cancer early, rather than to pick it up at the age of 48, and at that point it is spread to other parts of the body. So we also have to mention if you have a family history. So if I had a family member who had a colon cancer diagnosed at age 45, the current recommendations is that screening begin for me not at age 45, but at age 35, which is 10 years younger. And so you can do the math. If your family member was diagnosed at age 28, you start your screening at 18. There are also some familial colon cancers in which the entire family would have it. And so if you've had a family member diagnosed with one of those familial cancers, we want to get those persons in as early as possible to screen them. It makes a big difference if I just take out, or one of the gastroenterologists or another surgeon should just take out a polyp using a scope, rather than having to take it to the operating room, to take out a part of your colon, and to give you a stool bag for either indefinite or for even for a short term, which is 3 months. It makes a huge difference, and having good colonoscopes and gastroscopes can be that difference needed in our country.
How often for an average person is it recommended that they get screened for their colon?
So it doesn't necessarily always start with a colonoscopy. There are stool tests that people can do, and the recommendation is to start with a stool test. And if that stool test identifies something worrisome, then you can go to a colonoscopy. If you have a high quality colonoscopy done, then usually you don't have to get another colonoscopy for 10 years. Sometimes if you have a colonoscopy and something is found, you may have a shortened interval, such as 3 to 5 years, but it depends on the findings. But in general, if you had a clean colonoscopy, it's generally 8 to 10 years before you need to have that. Having this equipment has also allowed us to ensure that when we tell you that you came and you had a clean colonoscopy, that it is in fact clean. And having good equipment means that we can see everything we need to see, because it is sometimes unfortunate that things are missed. And having good equipment and making sure that we have good quality in the persons who are doing the colonoscopy to ensure that when you're told that you're clean, that you're in fact clean.
Dr. Woodley, Dr. Grant spoke about the importance of having two equipment so that it can be done properly in terms of being able to clean it, to ensure that there's no cross-contamination, and also maintenance. He mentioned that. What's in place for that maintenance schedule, and also in terms of exposing persons at the hospital to know how to use the equipment properly? That would be the training part of it.
Okay, so I don't know if the images showed it, but we also got an piece of equipment that actually cleans the scope, which is good. And he as well, I mean, we are calling Dr. Amri's name pretty often, because when he came in, Dr. Amri, he brought in his team. This is how serious he was about it. He brought in his team, and his team comprised of nurses. And these are nurses who are just trained in doing colonoscopies and EGDs, as we call them. What he also did was capacity training as well of our nurses. So his nurses, they actually trained our nurses. And here I can speak about Nurse Osborne. She is one of the nurses who was trained by Dr. Amri. We have Nurse Benjamin as well, who was trained by Dr. Amri and his team. So these nurses, they actually are so versed. In fact, they're sometimes even more versed than us, the doctors, when it comes to cleaning these scopes. And we have added that quote-unquote luxury now by getting the instrument that actually cleans the scope. We also purchased, there is a cabinet as well, where we can have the scopes being hung there. And it actually helps us in terms of knowing how clean our scopes are, so that, as Dr. Grant spoke about, we don't have this lot of infection happening. Having the two scopes, as Dr. Grant mentioned, it doesn't put the nurses, who are the ones who actually clean the scopes, under pressure to get it back to us so that we can do another procedure. So it have enough time for the scopes to soak for them, and we have to soak them in special liquid so that we can move whatever fecal matter from the tubing. It gives them time enough to flush the scopes as well. And while they're doing that, we are now able to move to the other scope that we have there, because we have two scopes for each. We can move to the other scope and carry on our procedures as normal. So the cleaning of the instruments, it's very important. As I said, we are now trying to get dedicated nurses to do such. In fact, our objective is to build an endoscopic unit. Actually, Dr. Grant, he has already proposed that we get nurses just for that unit, because it is something that you have to have a passion for. And we have to be real, not all nurses would want to be doing that all the time, but we have already identified nurses who would have been trained not only by Dr. Grant, but by Dr. Amri and his team. So we are building this unit, and when we say endoscopy, it's not just the colonoscopy and the gastroscope. In fact, endoscopy means going within, looking within. So we are also extending that unit to our laparoscopy, which is where we are now bringing our conference in next year so that we can get that unit expanded.
Right, and of course the conference, the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, the Honourable Dr. Terence Drew, would have referred to that conference, and as I mentioned earlier, it would be the Caribbean Society of Endoscopic Surgeons. It's their 12th annual scientific conference, and it will be held here in St. Kitts and Nevis. So we have just about 15 minutes left, and we're going to take our final break, and we're going to come back and dedicate that time to talk a bit more about the conference and what it means for persons here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Stay with us, we'll be right back with more in Focus.
If you haven't done it as yet, please do it today. Subscribe to our YouTube page at SKNIS Media for regular updates, live coverage, and even more information on your government. While you're at it, like, share, and interact with our Facebook and Instagram pages at SKNIS Media and SKNIS Info.
Welcome back to In Focus. We continue our discussion with Dr. Jolette Woodley-Faisal and also Dr. Mark Grant, and we are now turning our attention to an upcoming conference here in St. Kitts and Nevis. It seems to be a very groundbreaking conference for some of the things that are going to be happening, and I'll let them explain that to you. Dr. Grant and Dr. Faisal, tell us about this conference that is upcoming, and Dr. Woodley, I'd probably start with you there about the conference. Tell us about the conference.
Okay, so it's a big thing. As you said, it's iconic because this is the first time this association, the Caribbean Society of Endoscopic Surgeons, will be holding or hosting their conference here in St. Kitts. Actually, this conference was brought here because I visited Grenada when they were having their 10th annual conference there. And I saw what it did for Grenada. I saw the exposure it gave Grenada. Grenada was on the cusp, just like us, in building an endoscopic unit and getting laparoscopy up and going. And they were trying to entice the policymakers, because we always have to get the policymakers and shareholders involved. They are the ones who have, the money, the purse. So I saw what it did for Grenada, and Grenada has taken off. So while at that conference, I actually made the plea, and that was like about 2 years ago, that we have, if not the 11th, the 12th annual conference here in St. Kitts. And the executive of cases, as the acronym says, they latched on and they liked the idea. They were a bit surprised when they asked me if we are doing laparoscopy on, probably a daily basis, a weekly basis. And I told them in its minimum form, you would have the gynecologist who would probably do a case here and there. But it wasn't something that we were offering to our people on a daily, on a weekly basis. They were a bit surprised because, as Dr. Grant would have said before, laparoscopy or keyhole surgery is probably 20, 30 years now in its progression. And we as a people, I think we need to be exposed to the cutting edge things too. I always say the treatment somebody in New York, Switzerland is exposed to, I don't see why somebody here in St. Kitts and Nevis shouldn't be exposed to it. So I lobbied for it, and eventually it is here. Dr. Grant at the time, he said to me, I'm going to be here with you in 2024. I thought that was a dream, but I know I would need help. He said to me, let's not do the 11th one because I won't be there. Let's do the 12th one. I said, okay, contrary to belief, I listen to people. And I said, okay, Dr. Grant, you promised me you're going to be here in 2024. I'm going to lobby for 2024, and we did. And we are here. And it is so amazing that when you dream and you work towards a dream, it can actually be realized. And it feels good. It's a little emotional because when I came back in 2014, I had proposed this to the then administration, and I got shut down. So now that, things have changed, dynamics have changed, we have a new dispensation that allows you to grow. I am so happy that this can be realized now. Mm-hmm. So we are here, and next month, starting from the 14th to the 16th, the conference will be hosted here in St. Kitts at the Marriott Resort. Actually, the conference has gotten so big that some doctors have volunteered to come in before and do some of these same colonoscopies and EGDs as well. Because they see, this is a way of them giving back. And Dr. Spencer Amory, he has also put up his hands again, and he is going to be so active in this conference as well. So I'm not going to take too much because I want Dr. Grant to chime in as well, because he has done a lot. And I also want to say that I have invested a lot into this conference, because currently the laparoscopy machines that are at the hospital, I purchased them. I'm trying to entice, the policymakers, and if you are looking, Minister of Health, all of those persons with deep pockets out there, we actually do need the hospital to have its own instruments. I took a loan, yes, and I bought the instruments to get the ball rolling. That's how serious and passionate I am about getting the healthcare system to a level that we can all be satisfied about. So I have purchased these equipment, and things look good. We have gotten some great response from the policyholders, the Ministry of Health, that in the near future, and I'm going to hold them to their words, that they would be able to get us a tower that is owned by the hospital. I can easily say, let me monopolize that service, but I don't want to monopolize it. I want that the hospital has a tower, and as Dr. Grant has said on many occasions, persons from the diaspora can come in and just go to JNF and use a tower. They don't have to ask my permission to use my machines, although that's not a problem. But what we're trying to do is to equip the hospital with its own. Today or tomorrow, I decide to get up and go. So I cannot leave the system or cannot hold the system hostage. And that is the curse we want to break, and we are breaking by pushing the government to have the hospital gets its own. So this conference, exposure, Dr. Grant?
Right, and Dr. Grant, I think having you here as well, to your presence, signals the willingness of the ministry, signals the willingness of the Prime Minister, of course, to step forward to begin to roll the ball in these areas.
Right, and I would have to reiterate what Dr. Woodley has said in terms of having our own equipment and the role that would play in accelerating those services. If I were to go back to the colonoscope and gastroscopes, though, we're not just trying to build, get equipment and build a unit. We're trying to build a service. And building a service means that we have dedicated persons for management. We also have a dedicated budget to ensure that the things that we're using on a day-to-day basis, call it consumables, that those be available. We have to get away from the idea of necessarily not providing budgetary support, because if we don't have budgetary support, the equipment fails, is not well maintained. Eventually we have a situation in which it is free to all but is available to none. So in trying to build a service, we're trying to build a service not just of equipment and a physical space, but the human resources and the support that is necessary for that. If I would then go to the conference, I remember sitting in Grenada next to Dr. Woodley, and I said, okay, I'll be in St. Kitts, I can certainly help with that. And I'm happy that, she made that plea, and I'm happy that I'm here to provide that support. Hopefully, we would make greater strides than other Caribbean countries would have made after the conference. We would have all possible providers who are interested in providing the service on board. We will have involvement of the diaspora, but it will also showcase to the policymakers we're serious about providing quality service to people in St. Kitts Nevis. I can say that something that is futuristic is robotics, and I'm not too sure if at the current pricing that one can justify bringing that to St. Kitts Nevis, but I see the pricing becoming more and more conducive with time, and that should be the direction which we should go at some point in time in the future.
Okay, Ian, not to cut you off, but the conference couldn't be successful without our sponsors. And I don't know if you can permit me some time to even just to say thank you to our sponsors, because many times we have conferences or we have activities and we don't acknowledge those persons who would have helped.
Before you get to the sponsors, there's a point that you made that I want to touch on, because it's not the first time that you mentioned it in terms of persons coming in to use the equipment from overseas, persons from the diaspora. I think it's important to note that persons understand that they don't just come in randomly and begin to use the system, that there are procedures, there are guidelines, there are rules in place that would ensure that things are done up to the proper standard for best practices.
So if I can touch on that, we are currently building out the protocols. When I say we're building a service, the protocols are a part of the service. And the protocols, basically, we ensure that people familiarize themselves with the equipment before taking it up. We want to put in place protocols about safe use. I was in touch with the manufacturers just recently, and one of the things that we're putting in place is a WhatsApp chat group between the engineers from the manufacturers to the local engineers at the hospital. That would ensure that we have proper upkeep and maintenance of the equipment. So we're building a system. We don't want people to just come in and damage the equipment. We want to make sure that the system is in place to ensure that the equipment is cared for, used properly, and maintained so it can last us the 10 years that is expected to last.
Right. And also, Dr. Woodley, an important part of the conference will be basically live surgery. Tell us a bit about that component.
Well, that component for the confidentiality aspect of it, we cannot really share, any intricacies or details what would happen that day. But what I can say, yes, as you would have mentioned, we are going to be having live surgeries. We want to underscore that it's not anything we are practicing. It's persons who are trained in doing these surgeries will be doing them. I will be part of it. Dr. Nariani will be part of it, but we will be proctored or will be, overlooked by Dr. Grant and the other doctors who are coming in who have been practicing this for so many years. Also, we have actually sat with the patients who are going to be a part of this day. We have explained to them exhaustively, extensively what the procedure is all about, that they're not coerced, they're not forced to. As Dr. Grant told one of them this morning, that 1 minute before the procedure, you can actually say, no, I do not want to be a part of this.
You can opt out.
You can opt out. So it is something that is free. Everybody would be signing documentation for confidentiality, not just the doctors alone, but the patients themselves. And we have gone through an extensive process, as I explained to you before, the pre-operative care, where we would have sent them to do all of their testing. They would see the anesthesiologist. And then hopefully next month, then we would have, on the 14th, the live surgery. On the 15th, we will be having conferences, presentations from doctors who will be here in person, and some of them would be there virtually. We'll be topping off the 15th in the night with a grand gala at the Marriott as well, where we'll be having our guest speakers, we'll be having honorees. Also on the 14th, which would be the live surgery in the night, we'll be having a welcome cocktail as well. We will have all of our dignitaries there as well to welcome our guests. This conference has many purposes. It's also to expose St. Kitts. We are a tourist destination. So we want people to see how pretty and give them the warm Sugar City love that they can always think about coming back to St. Kitts. So we're going to give them a little piece of St. Kitts in so many ways. So it's not something that is just academic, but it's also something to bring monies to our country as well.
Right. And we have just about 1 minute left, so I'll give you that opportunity to highlight your sponsors.
Yes, so we cannot have this conference, or we would not be able to have this conference without our sponsors. And I would want to start out with our local sponsors, and we have Republic Bank. And I especially want to thank Mistress Pamela Herbert Daniel. She's the country manager for Republic Bank, and she came on board with a generous platinum sponsorship to us, and we want to thank her so greatly for that. We also want to thank the International University of Health Sciences in the form of Dr. Andrew Mary and crew, who actually came on board, gave us sponsorship as well at the gold level, and they also have given us other support in terms of their rooms and their services for IT as well. I also want to thank First Federal Cooperative Credit Union, who actually came out. They were actually one of the first persons who came out and actually supported us. So I want to say a big thank you to them as well. Royal Logistics, the delivery experts, great job. Mr. Colin Williams, he came on board pro bono. He said, whatever you need, I would give it to you, because he loves the initiative that we are doing at the hospital. Too often we get in the news for the bad. So when Mr. Williams saw this, he said, Dr. Woodley, Joy, I'm going to help. It's for the health system. I'm going to help. So he's the one responsible for bringing in all of the equipment, getting everything to the hospital free of charge. So I really want to give him a big thank you. We have Stanley's Renewed Life Elderly Care Limited, one of our local doctors. They just gave it to us. We have WellPoint and Oncology Center, Dr. Marissa Grant-Tate. We have Dr. Siobhan Henry. Of course, we have the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office, and we have the Ministry of Health. We have our regional sponsors, which we will do at another time, but I just really wanted to thank our local sponsors for coming on board and making this conference a reality.
Dr. Joylette Woodley Faisal and also Dr. Mark Grant, we thank you so much for being with us for this edition of InFocus. It was informative, and we certainly expect to hear a lot more about this conference as time draws a little closer. We'd like to thank you, viewers and listeners as well, for being with us for this edition of InFocus. For now, I'm Ian Richards. Be sure to join us next week at the same place, at the same time, for another edition of InFocus.
Join us every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.